我们就邀请3位讲者 ，Let's invite all the speaker, Lafon, Mr. Deng, and Jeremy to join our discussion. 我们很高兴刚刚前面的3位讲者帮我们分享智慧市民的种种可能。那在这边我想先请3位讲者跟我们分享一下，从你们各自的经验，什么是你们的手上 case 的 commons。然后我觉得从这个点出发来让各位先进跟师生朋友能够开始来跟大家讨论，对智慧市民来说，什么样是所需要的commons， 以及我们该如何组合这些东西来去让社会更好。
What is the commons?
Yes.
So the question is, what is the commons, or what is the commons for our particular projects? And I guess to try to keep it simple, I would relate it to these ideas of smart communities from Berlin. For example, the housing cooperative. So in the housing cooperative, you have a situation where the members of the cooperative, so for example, in the place where I live and work, we have about 85 members. These people are together, so as a collective, the owners of the land and the buildings. So a situation of new commons is created in this way. So the difference is, again, I relate this, I say this is between private and public. So we're not talking about private ownership, and we're not talking about state ownership. We're talking about a cooperative or a collective ownership of this land. So that's, hello, does that work?
It's sort of dropping out. I think the battery's sort of going on that one.
Should we repeat that?
Is there another microphone?
I'm speaking.
Is that okay?
It's okay.
Okay.
I'll speak louder.
I'll try another way.
Yeah.
It's a question that gets often posed. I like to give answers that refer to historical facts. And I think that one of the origins of the modern concept of commons is to be traced in Cochabamba, in Bolivia, when the popular movement of Bolivia fought the privatization of water against American corporations like Beltec that wanted to privatize it, and fought it through a political process that actually renovated this concept. And it was an historical movement. I was born in Italy, and in Italy we also had a movement for public water. And it's extremely important because just like water, data in the digital space has also a value that is very important to anyone that wants to grow something. So there you go with my argument against corporations that enclose data. It's just like water. Just like Airbnb or Uber can make a business out of the data that we find in cities, then many other local companies could make a business out of them. So it's very important because when you put data into a database of a corporation, then the corporation will not give you back this data, will not share it with others. It will stay there, and many people for convenience will stay into this system. So one of our projects with the European Commission is really trying to get technological sovereignty for data commons, because we believe that data should be handled as a commons, not in a private and not in a public way, because data is also privacy. It has to be also, it has to have a degree of privacy.
我还是用中文，这个不是 Chinese。
Yes,
Sorry.
Yeah. No. I am sorry that I don't understand the Chinese.
在我的经验里面呢，一个 community 的形成呢，多数是从，在我的经验里面，多数的 community 的形成呢，是一个要解决问题的过程。所以我们的最大的 common 呢，是来自于一开始呢是来自于问题的解决，要解决什么样的问题？所以我们的目的会非常清楚，是我们要解决什么问题。然后呢，从这个要解决问题的过程里面呢，找到一种方法，或是多种方法来回答这个问题，或是来解决这个问题。最后呢，这个方法呢可以被重复使用，或者呢它是可以被学习的，而形成了更多人的共同。那这是我个人的经验啊，我比较简单的去回答这个问题，是这样的过程。
我想说，在我们从比较接近西方的生活环境跟城市的样貌当中，试图去把一些已经被私有化，然后试图在把它完整的放到公共脉络里面。我觉得这个是一个重新定义什么是 commons 的过程。那这个角度跟在座的中国的经验有什么样的对话？这也是我们想借着这样子的讨论来带出这样子的讨论。那在智慧市民的这个当中，我们让每个个人越来越被赋予他的权利，越来具有更多的能动性的时候，怎么样去联合，然后最后有不一样的生活？那我不晓得黄老师这边有没有一些看法，怎么样在中国的脉络下去理解这种市民层次的公跟私跟那个不同的这样对话。
好，非常谢谢三位讲者的说明。也许我不是一个最好可以解释中国状况的人，不过可能各位知道，因为在中国所有的土地都属于国家的。那在村的层次，在 village 层次的话，他们是集体所有，一个村子是集体所有。所以对他们来说，区分公私并不太大的意思，特别在土地的层次上。可是因为在1988年之后，他们的土地权跟土地拥有权跟土地使用权开始可以分开了使用了，以至于它会产生另外一种 privatization 的 process。那这种土地使用权跟土地所有权的分开，会造就另外一波新的都市化的过程，比如说房地产开始变得有价值了。那这是中国一个特殊要面临的问题。那现在这个状况也不是太能够很仔细的分析，因为它中国非常巨大，然后有各种不同的diversity， 每个地方也不太一样。那可是因为这个东西正代表，假设也跟各位三位讲的公共性可能有点关系。假设 common 某种程度是因为使用权而不是所有权的话，那在三位的例子里头，其实都有很多门槛。譬如说，在 Michael 的例子里头，如果你不是一个合作社的社员，你可能就没有办法参加那个合作社住宅。那并不是所有人都可以有机会参加合作社住宅，或者是某种程度你要有一点点资本或资产，你才可以去玩这个产品游戏。那在东坡的例子里头是，我起码是一个有点义务、有点闲的工程师，或懂一点东西，我才可以帮忙画这个图。那 Jeremy 的门槛就更高了，对吧？就是后面两位的东西是对一般公民来说，那个技术门槛还是很高，就是那些技术可能对我们来说不是 affordable 的。那 Michael 的方式可以在那个过程中慢慢形成一种 common 是我可以理解的。很多人还是就算比较穷，也有可能可以盖成合作社住宅，所以每个案子都还是有一些门槛。所以我在想，如果 common 这个东西不是一个概念层次的话，那 suppose 一定会跟所谓的 affordable 有关。那我们怎么样想象这个 affordable 到底是怎么一回事？对一般人来说，在技术层面上，如何可能的问题？那可能中国现在更需要这样的讨论。
谢谢黄老师，因为对我而言，就是前面尤其是在拉放的投影片，在拉放的投影片当中，对我最有启发的其实是 come on，加上 ing， 就是 come on。那而且在 come on 的这个过程，尤其是在 我活在台湾的脉络，那甚至是比较偏自由主义倾向的，就是它变成是一个就是自发的、自愿性的，然后去加入这样子的一个获得好名声，甚至是说参与到一个介入到一个建构社会的一个过程。可是有很多当事人其实是在这个状态被剥夺或者资产被剥夺的状况底下，才会去进入的一个社会运动。这是通常台湾的社会在开始变化，而且开始 evolve 的演进的时候，这是一个基础。可是如果是在一个自发性参加，而且是有一点偏自由主义倾向的话，其实它是非常某个角度来说，沿着刚刚黄老师的讲法，有一点奢侈，有一点是有闲的状况底下才创造出来的东西。那它也会变得比较偏向专业者，例如地图的绘制者，或者是城市设计师的自己的专业做一个贡献去做对话。那怎么样让这样子的东西牵扯到跟更多的人有相关的这些公共性的部分，其实就是我们平常比较关心的这样子的问题。那通常在学校里面，这样子的议题就会变成是一个learning 的 commons， 或者是像 TED 这种演讲的这个材料被流通，然后甚至是教育的开放。但是回到更大的社会，甚至居住，甚至生活，然后一起照顾孩子，然后一起买房子的这些过程，其实就会走到合作社的这个面向。那我觉得在这些当中的大的我们讲 whole picture， 就是这整个的大的社会场景，如果说对各位能够慢慢比较具体之后，那对于台上各位讲者的一个贡献，我想会更为清楚。就是说拉放在20几年来的这个耕耘，以及那个东坡在地图跟在这一些作为科学家的互相合作，以及那个 Jeremy 在城市设计跟提供给公民组织更好的工具，让他们可以发挥更大的角色，去影响更多人上面。我想各位会比较清楚。这也是希望我们刚刚前面的这一轮的 commons 的讨论，能够帮助大家稍微更进入一下这个脉络。那不晓得各位先进有没有一些你们的困惑，或者是跟你们的到目前为止理解上可以对话的部分，再请各位
我想问一个问题，就是给Jeremy。So I'm quite interested in your speech about blockchain technologies and different philosophies behind that. And one of the mainstream logic you mentioned was proof of work algorithm. And I would like to ask for your thoughts on either alternative logic behind blockchain technologies, and more importantly, what sort of social and cultural context do you see as factors that drive particular blockchain technologies, particular algorithm logic?
It's should I answer now the question? Yes. It's pretty complex to answer. There are various phases for this phenomenon that I identify, and I was involved into it since 2010. I like to bring up concrete facts through a friend, Amir Taki, who went on TV, on Al Jazeera and other channels as a very famous, prominent advocate of it. And the first thing that he did in 2012, instead of continuing into the financialization of this phenomenon, was take a radical route and go to Rojava in Kurdistan to join the actual resistance there of the Kurdish state. And he saw this at that time, as a friend, he told me, he saw this as a moment in which people back 50 years ago joined the resistance in Spain against the dictatorship. And this was one of the first developers after the unknown Satoshi Nakamoto to actually write a lot of code for this technology. Nowadays, Amir believes that Bitcoin is not anymore a revolutionary technology and should not be of interest for us. I think this is an interesting thing. He is a little bit of the embodiment of the trajectory, and perhaps it is a fate. It is the fate of most technologies that try to fight a problem with its own problem. In case of Bitcoin, it generated a financialization vector that became completely subsumed by what it wanted to fight, the financial market. It was the very financial market, it was Wall Street that was cutting off the pipes to donate to WikiLeaks. But it was also Wall Street that immediately funded, perhaps not immediately Bitcoin, but for instance, the second project, Ethereum, had huge investments from Goldman Sachs from the very beginning. So I think that if we want to look finally to critical social context that can counteract this, we have to really put people before the technology, as it was very well explained by other distinguished guests today, and understand that trust could be fixed, can be notarized, can be tokenized technically with a blockchain, but we really need to understand what are the conditions for us to create, establish, and negotiate trust. So, yeah, perhaps it's really to be found, the context has to be found perhaps in the arts, perhaps in the social sciences, in those sciences that put first social processes and then identifies problems and then finally come with technical solutions.
我觉得我可能有一个问题问 Jeremy， 然后，你不断提到 data 作为城市的资源，作为人的资源，然后这也就是回应上午王坚的讨论，他也一直在提数据作为城市资源，但是在比如说王坚做的智慧大脑里面，他没有提是谁在掌握这个数据，然后这个数据很明显是政府在掌握，是一个高度的 centralized， 高度被中央化、被集权化且完全不透明的数据。那比如说，就我会想听你怎么谈，就是你怎么看待王坚的那个 project， 然后我也会好奇，就是在要做一个 intelligent citizen 的话，我们怎么可以去中心化这个数据？就是我们的数据，我们可以怎么 how can we calculate our data? Like we don't hand over to Airbnb or Uber or.
Thank you for the question. I'm very passionate about the argument. And we have a project that we are running called Decode. It's a flagship project funded by the European Commission, right on this spot on this topic. So I think that the most important part for a brain, like a city brain, in the data to function is not the single person function, but the aggregation of this data. And the aggregation happens around attributes. So in Decode, we are taking a radical stance. First of all, we are saying there is no identity. Identity is a cultural construction that is dictated by the limitation of our perception of the topic. No one of us has one identity. We all have multiple identities. Or perhaps we have attributes that we can show in different contexts. And these attributes can be aggregated to produce meaningful data. Also, I'm naming attributes because in cryptography exists an advancement, recent, relatively in the last 10 years, which is called attribute-based credentials, attribute-based encryption. It is possible to disclose certain attributes without disclosing the whole data. For instance, I can prove that I am above 18 years old and I can buy alcohol, in Europe that's the law, without telling you what is my birth date, which is more sensible information because birthday is often used, for instance, by banks to authenticate you. So disclosing your birth date could be also a way to have identity theft. And so on and so forth, we contemplate situations in which people can disclose certain attributes to authenticate themselves to a service, but not the complete data. There is not a solution right now that we envision to the fact that the data is owned by an authority. But what we see is that more and more there are third-party services that process this data, and they need a certain certification that it's true. For instance, in Barcelona we work with the municipality to enable a platform for petitions. People in Barcelona are making petitions about how the money is spent on their local situation. So fix the street, put a park there, put a children park, they decide it. They propose it and they vote into a petition. The platform is run by an organization called Decidim, We Decide. It's not a governmental organization. It's an organization trusted by the government. For them, holding data about citizens is necessary because only the people that live there can vote. But for them to hold this data is a big liability. So we use cryptographic systems in order to certify by the municipality the people that want to participate into this platform. So you don't disclose all your data, you don't show your passport, your ID to the CDM. You only show them the certification that was issued by the municipality, by the government. And this way we are managing to grant already a bigger degree of privacy. We are not solving all the problems. We are studying also the scenario of full decentralization. But I believe that the threat does not come only by the centralization of data in the government, but perhaps by the growing need to process this data in many different ways. And at least in Europe, we identify as the bigger problem not the government, but the private sector, and especially multinational corporations.
我自己有一个问题是沿着刚刚Jeremy 的问题，Jeremy 的回答，然后那在这当中，在我问这个问题的时候，我也欢迎各位，就是我们应该还有时间，最后一轮，所以如果各位有问题，也可以请准备。那我的问题其实蛮小，就是那个我们因为在国际蛮重要的新闻，其实也是巴塞隆纳的新闻，就是他们透过 IPFS 去处理他们关于公投投票的，所以我蛮好奇的，就是说在这个事件过后，那这样子的科技系统有帮助巴塞隆纳市，或者是帮助这个区域的人，他们如何更好的捍卫他们自己想要的一个生活方式吗？ Yeah， 所以我不晓得，就是那个 Jeremy 他们在跟巴塞隆纳的这个合作上有没有一些对这个问题的一个比较故事方面的一个了解？ Yeah， 然后
我可以顺着那个伊利亚的问题顺便追问一下，因为在其实整个欧洲城市有一些非常巨大的治理的转变，因为中国也是这样，比如说杭州市政府因为受到王坚博士的鼓励，他们成立一个新的局，叫做数据资源局，好像以前我们有自然资源局一样，所以有一个这样的管理单位。那么在欧洲，我们知道刚刚伊拉提到，比如说我们知道巴塞隆纳有一个城市的 CTO。 那么，在荷兰阿姆斯特丹城市有一个科学长，有城市层级的科学长。换句话说，整个新的政府的治理开始进行一些改变，它需要用新的位置跟角色来处理这个新的科技跟新的技术转型的问题。那在台湾也出了一个 Digital Minister， 数位政委。那这些事情都在转变中。但我很好奇，在这个时候，我反而 比较相信 Michael， 他们在柏林做的实验，原因是因为像这样的人进去，你可以说这个政府变得比较开明了，你也可以说这个政府只是让一个技术进到一个政府，所以它可能更具有对人民的统治的危险，我们更无力抵抗的意思。这看你在哪一种政体里头说这个话。那所以我觉得 Michael 他们工作，因为我知道Michael 如果说错可以告诉我，因为他今天刚好那个 身体不舒服，所以没有办法多说。我去过 Michael 那个社区看过，整个柏林有非常强大的从 Square Movement 到现在很多合作社住宅的传统，也就是因为这样，所以他们在公司部门间做了一个非常好的政治框架。比如他们做那个 experimental day， 就让市民去提案，然后可以直接跟政府协商。他不去，政府必须面对人民团体的协商，不是他们说了算。那他们在每一个不同的住宅计划里头都会要求，政府会要求说，如果要给你比较好的土地，那你要回答你这个住宅能有什么样的社会功能？譬如说，它是跨性别的住宅、跨年纪的住宅，还是它是什么样合作性住宅，以至于政府才会给你土地。换句话说，市民是在这个长期的教育的过程里头，在一个合作的状况里头，能够有能力提案，而让跟市政府沟通的。所以我觉得这个东西其实是整个政治的格局跟统治的方法在变。那如果居民不是 individual 对 state， 而是要 collective 起来，然后才能够对抗某种 state 的新的治理。那我其实很想要知道说，各位三位有什么对这种新的变局有什么样的看法？
Yeah, you bring up some interesting points. I think on some levels, if we look at, so I'm talking about urban design and planning, development, community projects, we can see that in some ways our approaches are coming together. So for example, what we know in Berlin and Chinese cities. So if we look at the European city, then if we go back 100, 200 years, there was this very strong movement of privatization of land, emphasis on private property as a very high power. And now we're moving back to maintaining land in the ownership of the city and separating the use, the ownership of the building from the ownership of the land. So this is, there are things that we can learn from each other on. So the future for Berlin, for example, is land staying in the ownership of the city or going into the ownership of the city, or maybe some other kind of a non-profit foundation. And then the use, for example, of a community project like a cooperative, like the place where I'm living right now. So what this can mean in the next months and years is that the city says, okay, we like smart communities, we like cooperatives, we like basically non-profit or non-speculative affordable housing projects. And the city says, we have some land and we look for the best project, a kind of a competition is organized. And they look for the best concept. And these people, they don't get to buy the land, they get to lease the land, they get to use this land. They can own their building, but they don't get to own the land. So we see our cities in some ways moving together, which I think is an interesting kind of phenomenon.
Try to be quick. You asked me many things. About IPFS and the referendum, I could talk for hours. I made also a security assessment of what happened. And I can tell you quickly, there was no leak of information about the citizens of Barcelona, as some other hackers claimed. The system that the Catalonia has developed was very secure, but it was not unstoppable. So it was censored at the DNS level. And I could go more in deep about this. There is one more anecdote, as Professor Wong brings forward. I'm very happy that you mentioned the city opposition in Barcelona. Is a very dear colleague of mine, Francesca Bria, and I think her lead in the last 4 years, together with Mayor Ada Colau, two very powerful and enlightened women, and I think also the gender is not a coincidence, they brought the change. Have led to situations in which, for instance, now the municipality of Barcelona announced that they will abandon Microsoft for their infrastructure, because Microsoft was actually invasive, was also charging too much for things that can be developed locally, that can be run by people with the knowledge that of the people that live there, and therefore creating also employment in place of a global consultancy gig. And this was, you can imagine, like provisioning in a city is a very, very complex business. And just getting rid of such a big company has been a big effort. I like also to quote in the Netherlands a recent situation. This was news of 2 days ago. It was understood that through Office, through the use of online Office Cloud from Microsoft, it was gathered a lot of data, and against the new regulation in Europe, the GDPR regulation, this data was stored in the US. And this is a violation, so now they are, the Dutch government is working to assess the damage and threatens a huge fine to Microsoft for this violation of the law. And I think that we should all take these as big examples to fight back what is an invasion of privacy and a data mining of the commons operated by multinational mega corporations.
我这边就回答刚刚黄教授提的那个问题哦。那我这边就回答黄教授刚提那个问题。那个我上个礼拜3周前刚去了阿根廷，然后参加了 International Open Data Conference。那这个 conference 里面提到的东西都是资料，不是只有 open data 而已，而是它资料的问题。那其中有一个概念很重要，是 data ethicity， 就是资料伦理的问题。为什么会有这个问题？是我们在强调 smart city， 在强调 AI 的过程里面，我们使用很多资料来做资料的治理，就是 data for governance。在这个过程里面，事实上我们忽略一件事情是，我们在做这个资料的治理过程里面，可能会把我们个人隐私，把我们很多的资料在这个过程里面就丧失了。那这个权利的问题到底是谁要来掌控？这其实是一个非常严重的问题，是大家来想，我的在使用这个资料的过程里面，不是只有资料问题，还包含了我使用的这个 AI 的 algorithm 要怎么去控制隐私权的外漏的问题。那这些问题呢，就回过头来讲说，为什么我们需要一个像资料治理局啊，像台湾的台中市有一个资料治理局，或是各个政府里面需要一个这样子的政府单位呢，来去管控这个资料，或是呢来去掌握这个资料。因为现在的方式已经不再是单纯的靠政策环境在改变，资料扮演相当的角色，而不是只有单纯的靠过去的方式呢就可以去治理，而是有更多的方式，我们可以用资料的方式来引导我们的政策，也就是资料治理的部分。那在这样的脉络底下呢，资料的使用方式就变成需要去concern的问题，所以才会引发出这么多的问题出来。那我没有答案，但是在在我参加的这个 session 里面，的确讨论到很多 data ethicity 的问题，我们要怎么样去各个国家面对的问题是不一样。好像台湾我们在推行买 data， 这是买 data 的问题啊，我们的健康资料，我的土地权的资料，有可能在我不相信政府的过程里面，我的资料有可能丧失掉。那怎么样让人民相信政府，然后愿意把这个资料所有权是让给政府使用，其实也是一个非常大的问题。在台湾我至少看到这一点。
Yeah, I would like to follow up on both of the last two responses. By way of sort of contextualization, you know, in Australia, like many countries, there's this tendency towards nationalism. And the anxiety around data storage often provokes strong kind of preferences for something like data sovereignty equals data nationalism. So with regard to citizen data, for example, you know, there may be a preference for the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Actually, they've got their own mainframe, so that's not a good example. But there may be a preference for data to be stored within national data centers, as if it's somehow more secure than storing it in Singapore, for instance. So I'm interested in hearing more, Jeremy, from you and the way you ended your last response with the kind of critique of storage in the US. Now I can understand why you had that, but nevertheless I'm still interested in why there's more security within the national space. And maybe by way of sort of supplementary question, I'm also curious what the DINE strategy is for data storage, right? I mean, you can have these autonomous networks and infrastructures. But as long as the data is being held within a data center, then insecurity becomes a key question, it would seem. How would you deal with that?
Well, as a Unix user, first and foremost, I can say that my home is in my hard disk. It's a /home.
/home.
And in the development that we envision, we encourage people to hold their data on their own device and to separate the key. Of course, to encrypt it. I also identify myself as an early cypherpunk. Encrypt it, use encryption, and separate key from data, so that only when you join back the key, the password, and the data, then you can open what we call in a software tomb. You can access the skeletons in your closet, because we all have something to hide. Regarding security, I believe that the only sure thing in life is death. That's what we say in Napoli. So you can only improve a level of safety, but you cannot always be secure. But in instances of cloud hosting, and you name Singapore, one of the most tapped countries in the world, basically I think that we must avoid the obvious. And really I have big faith in cryptographic technologies, because I believe that not by disclosing our data, but by disclosing attributes, pieces of data whenever is needed in different contexts, then we can have a better security. We have to really envision different contexts and different attributes that we release.
I just think I use English or Chinese. I just say singular, you use English or Chinese. I use Chinese, okay? 在台湾我们面对到问题，除了刚刚讲的 algorithm 就演算法问题之外，因为台湾有相当多的 open data。那刚刚讲的 my data 呢，事实上是健康资料或是土地所有权资料。那它其实是存在国家的资料库里面去，但是 my data 的计划是呢，如果我个人允许其他单位呢去使用这个资料的话呢，它就会取得一个 key， 然后去使用这个资料。 但是我们担心的事情是呢，当我允许这个单位使用之后呢，这个资料就无限制的被使用，那这个 key 呢是没有差别的，好，那所以在我们的 case 里面，除了这样的问题之外，另外一个是 open data 跟其他资料在混合之后呢，会不会显示出来更多的 privacy 资料？这是大家所关心的问题。那在这个问题没有解决之前呢，事实上人民跟政府之间的信任感是没有的。 大家不相信政府所做的事情到底是真还是假，如果面临到问题。
From the background of an experience I had as a CEO member of the Berlin University of the Arts, and I teach the postgraduate program. Of course, we are collecting the school data of students and what the teachers teach, and what the students do, and so on and so on. Then we ask the staff who's collecting data if they know what is done with the data. And more, we found there are very few people in these offices that have no idea. So that's a question of a certain kind of dequalification or despecialization, and integrate some general idea what could be, from the point of data collection, the different directions of use. It's the same like in thinking crabs of planning and architecture. They ask planners what's happening when a mistake happens, and they all think in a linear way. But at a mistake, there is no linear succeedings. There are different succeedings, like a spiral network. You have no idea on this. So the question is, my curiosity is, how do we have to despecialize people that they have a general idea, besides as a parallel track, that we don't have this at the moment that somebody gets an idea, oh, I should join WikiLeaks because something is happening. And I understood this by accident because it happened with my data. I realized that writing mistake in my name in the school, and suddenly I got a lot of invitations from art-related enterprises, only by the mistake of the wrong writing of my name. So I realized that even my school sold my private data. But all the staff, except the leading officer of this department, did not know what happened with articles in my school. So we had to do the discussion of despecialization, and I'm curious about your opinion.
Yes. I'll try to be brief. I think one thing I also forgot to answer, Professor, is, no, Ned actually. We try to substitute the word security with awareness, and I think this speaks really well to your concern. We need people that are aware of what happens, and this is a matter of literacy, a matter of designing simple systems, but also an opportunity for new design efforts. Because I believe that most of the private sector of the software companies that are producing software today, they have no incentive to make their software sinful. They have no incentive to make systems understandable. Their incentive is to make systems easy. We will do it for you, don't worry. That's how Apple conquered the market. They just make it very easy for you to drop all your rights and to be in their hands to swipe a card anytime they ask you and pay for what they give you. They sugarcoat, and just like sugar, they make you addicted to it. So I think this is a big opportunity. We should have design efforts. We should have more. What we try to do at Dyn, we are a non-profit software house. When we develop software, we don't do it because there is a profit, because we can sell it, there is a business. We do it because there is a community needing it. Yeah. And we need more of these efforts. I wish they are started here, because I think in Europe we are quite lost. I see them, I mean, we are the white flies, because it is really difficult to find this sort of efforts. And all what is software, all what is digital is business. Is in the hands of business and incentives that are monetary. So this is the bigger opportunity. We can design systems that people will understand better. The incentive is not the market. It's not provided by the market.
Okay. I would like to direct the question to Mr. Lafont. I try to understand the whole discussion in a way as a kind of discussing the two kind of let's say in the broad sense the existence of our belief, because the housing is the foundation of our physical existence, and then there's the kind of the very primary discussion on physical existence. And I really respect the work of the two, but I would like to know what Mr. Lafont work and what his opinion about some of the maybe something that's difficult for him to address, but I want to see if some of the experience that you had in Berlin would lead to a future kind of discussion about co-op housing in China. Because as I know, Berlin, apart from this very exciting project that you did, Berlin or even Germany in general has a big kind of group of squatters. That is to say that this, as I understood, this is not as simple as a, let's say, a big movement. It's more like a fight that you have to fight in between, you know, the common group, also against the I don't know if it's public or private, but all these existing phenomena. And in China, there's a weird thing is that, for example, private entrepreneurship, like the brand I called Xiaomi, they are already trying to launch a big scheme that kind of works like a co-op housing, but they try to promote a housing product at a lower cost, but enter the market and trying to purchase lands in a kind of entrepreneur title, let's say enterprise title, and then resell land at a lower cost to people, and trying to offer a kind of alternative housing. And obviously this is nothing compared to what you're doing, but I wanted to see what you think out of your long history of experience. How do you how did you guys challenge this kind of to make this into a kind of part social welfare, part kind of group activity, because housing scheme in China only has a very little part that belongs to the state welfare. Even the 10% so-called affordable housing is provided by land developers. And then, and the housing scheme is basically the thing that keeps everyone working. It's, you know, it's a social government model learned from Singapore and Hong Kong. So, yes.
我们也邀请 Chris 也一起问，然后我这边顺便补充一下，我们网际网络年会在2016年的2位讲者，一位是 Geert Lovink， 他是荷兰当时参与 Squatters Movement 的很重要的一个参与者，然后另外一位 Graham Howard， 他是英国的 Squatter， 所以包括今天的那个Lafon 这边，我觉得各位可以拼凑这几个他们的网络上有相关的一个历史回顾的一个资料，是非常有帮助。所以各位也可以把他们的一些相关资料合在一起，这个脉络里面来去思考。那请 Chris。
So also attempting to connect some dots, and mainly that of commons and that of, let's say, the more data related cryptographic distributed ledger issues we're discussing. I was curious if the speakers would venture, let's say, a little bit of forecasting in terms of possible combinations, in terms of trust procedures between the negotiation practices that are proper to commons in the, let's say, classical sense of Ostrom's commons, where there are certain types of negotiation amongst the community that makes for the maintenance and use of a shared resource in a stable way on the one hand. And then the proof of work, let's say, as another way of contributing to a collective in a more cryptographic sense. Whether there's a complementarity between this human-based negotiationary practice on the one hand and then the technology-based trust procedure cryptographically on the other hand.
Okay. So I start off with the comments and questions from above. I think first, to summarize the situation in Berlin. So I'm introducing what I call community-led, community-based housing, including things like cooperatives. There are a number of histories, a number of roots or histories. One is the cooperative movement, another one is the squatting movement, others are self-help housing. The squatting housing is very important in Berlin because it gave a lot of attention to this radical idea of self-organization. So this means not just participation where people are invited to comment on some plans, proposals, but people actually do what they want. So in some ways you can relate it to ideas of the anarchist movement, or what's in German called the autonomous movement. So it's important to understand this idea of self-organization. Not radical individuals doing just what they want, but groups of people. So this relates to my idea of the smart community. If we're looking for some kind of connection between what's happening in Berlin and Germany and what's happening in China, or what could be happening here, I would come back to a comment that was made by Jeremel, and that is an important question to ask us if we're interested in this idea of the commons or the idea of the community. Is the fundamental motivation? Is it a market motivation? Is it an investor-based motivation, or is it a motivation to develop a better product or something that's useful for people or something that is sustainable? So that's a starting point. And I relate that as being between private and public. Housing in Berlin, in Germany, and most of the world is either dominated by an individual approach, so private ownership, or it's dominated by a state approach. Yeah? This was true in East Berlin and East Germany until 1989. But what I'm talking about is something, again, in between here. It's not just the private individuals, and it's not just the state, but you have, in some ways, a return to this idea of the commons, where people understand, once again, this idea of the shared ownership, or the shared management. It makes a big difference in the result. I would like to compare. I don't know about the company that you're talking about that's developing large amounts of housing here, but I can relate the approach, I think, to a model that's being developed in larger cities like New York, Los Angeles, Barcelona, Berlin, called co-living. It's often called co-living, and it's quite often developed from an investor model, a developer profit motive. And what does it mean? The people that live there, these mostly young people, digital nomads, self-employed people who travel around the world. They get a micro apartment and they pay a lot of money for it. And the developer says, okay, we give you a little bit of community, and that makes it nice, and that means you can pay more money for it. So we see that ideas of community and ideas of the commons, of course, they get used by capitalists or by other developer approaches who are interested in making money. So the first question is, who's doing it and why are they doing it? And then you have a better understanding about what can come out of it. I hope that helps.
Thank you. I think it's a great answer, and really, purpose-driven development, I think, is the answer. You need to have a purpose. If the purpose is made by the market, then you are, like we say in the Netherlands, a kip zonder kop, a chicken without a head that keeps on walking. And I think purpose is very important. And to reply, Chris, I think it could be a debate, a panel on its own, and I hope you will cover also the view in your presentation tomorrow. We have worked with on a document that became also a policy document. It's freely available online, everything we do, with Francesca Bria as an author and as a co-author Carlo Vercellone from the University of Sorbonne. And it's called the Knowledge Commons. And I think this is the most forecasting analysis of the commons in the scenario of high digitalization and immaterial labor as well. And I believe that the categories of Elinor Ostrom are useful as a start, but they are not useful in contemporaneity. We need to go beyond them. We need to adapt them to new conditions. I think Vercellone dares also to criticize certain points of Ostrom, because myself, I agree with him. Ostrom comes out as a very normative and somehow neutral statement on the use of commons, whereas we have to actually also put in the picture labor conditions, the labor conditions that all these technologies are creating, and this becomes a very big discussion that I think Maurizio Lazzarato started from the very beginning with clear publications, and we could, of course, have a world conference about it, and I hope we will. Oh.
Okay. 我想，因为时间的关系，我们谢谢各位给我们更多的一些耐心。然后我想我总结一下这个 panel， 各位可以知道，从一开始我们以为是个别的 smart citizen 的一个视角，看到一个一个的个案，可是其实问题就越来越浮现。譬如说，智慧市民他所面对的是国家还是跨国公司，然后智慧市民他自己如何的组成合作力量，然后他所面对的如何去把这个 commoning 的过程转化，其实这个挑战是非常的多面向的。那我想今天的这个不同的commons 不同的面向，其实难度都非常的高。各位听到最后应该可以体会，我一开始要主持这个讨论的时候的那个脑中浮现的各方的这个复杂度。那我想也特别谢谢翻口译的同仁，因为他们实在太辛苦了，然后能够把这么多，对，也请大家给他们一些掌声，谢谢。然后